particularly important to the American Revolution.
And I'll say, what a talented bunch of people.
A child's toy with Mercury in it.
Lovely. Were there any winged death heads?
Of course.
Oh, I missed them. That's my favorite. Welcome to Archaeology Books for Fun, reading books that aren't drier than dirt. I'm your host, Tristan Harenstein, and with me as always is my co-host, Barbara Clark.
Hello, everybody.
And this time we are finishing up The Lost City of the Monkey God, or so we meant to. If you listen to our last podcast, you might remember we alluded to having to vacate our office for renovations and having to find a new place. Well, obviously, we found a new place. Thankfully, the park had some space for us to set up another recording booth in, so that's where we are right now. Unfortunately, we didn't account for all the effort that would go into that, plus our week-long work conference we had to go to, plus the day-long middle school program we had to do yesterday. So today we are sitting in the new space with our office fully moved out and taped up like it's from E.T.
Yes, they're having to do lead abatement, and kudos to the Florida Park Service for their effort to rehab one of the historic structures at this park. So kudos to them, and we are very thankful for them providing us space and all the things they've done to kind of help us transition while they take care of our cute little office building.
Yep, but all of that combined means that in the meantime, we simply ran out of time to actually get the reading done, let alone do a full podcast and the time it takes to edit it. Plus, then we've got holiday coming up next week as well.
Really, what he's saying is we're all full of excuses, but they're valid excuses.
It's just we got overwhelmed and we had to make a call that, for our sake, we can't do a full episode this month. So we apologize for that. We didn't want you to leave you without anything, though, so we thought we would talk about our recent trip to Williamsburg, Virginia, and we went there for the conference we alluded to, and it was interesting, I thought. Last time I'd been there, I was 14.
Yeah, I was younger. I was very young. The only thing I really remembered was the governor's house. That was it.
Yeah. So if you aren't familiar with this, I think most Americans probably would be, but I know there's some people that are not in the U.S. listening to this. This is a very well-known American colonial interpretive site. So it is interpreting some of the first Europeans that came in this area and set up this colony. And it's pretty famous for its interpretation. It has, I think, matured quite a lot over its many decades of operating.
Yeah, and it's one of the sites that is particularly important to the American Revolution. A lot of the seeds for that revolution were sown in the taverns and other places throughout Williamsburg. So it has a very, a lot of people kind of associate it with like American patriotism and that sort of era in history where we were revolting against the British crown.
And I will say, from my understanding of early colonial Williamsburg interpretation, that's all it was just kind of patriotism and this very curated version of the past. And it still is to some degree, but I was very impressed. They are dealing with some of the less pleasant parts of the past. It's not all of it's on the table now, it seems like, more or less.
Yeah, and I guess our executive director is familiar with that area. She's from Virginia. She worked at another site in Virginia for a while. And actually, she's descended from some of the people who settled Jamestown, which was near Williamsburg, earlier than Williamsburg. And she was saying that they have Williamsburg, the Colonial Williamsburg, the historic site that's interpreted, has a new recent executive director who I guess has been there for 3 or 4 years now, I think she said. And there was this transition that was happening where it was starting to get, for lack of a better word, Disneyfied. Mm-hmm. They were looking at how they can make money off of the site, because one of the things, and I think it's something that we saw throughout all the sites we visited up there, money is a huge issue. Financing all the renovations and all the upkeep and all the staff and everything like that is a constant challenge. And So they were looking at ways to up their money game.
Mhm.
And in doing so, they were kind of moving away from a lot of the core historic interpretation and looking at other things they could do to make money. And this new executive director has essentially brought it back to making historic interpretation more of a core principle. And it shows, I think.
Yeah, so like I said last time I was there, I was a kid, a teenager, and not interested in archaeology, and I didn't have the experience with interpretation that I do now. So now I'm coming back as an archaeologist and as a professional interpreter and kind of looking at it from those lens. And I'll say, what a talented bunch of people.
I was really impressed with the interpreters. So they do not do first person interpretation, which is where the person essentially takes on the persona of an individual unless they're interpreting a specific known historical figure. And so I didn't run into any of those. Like I didn't run into Lafayette or anybody. I ran into, the woman that worked behind the counter at the pharmacy and the guy who was serving us at the tavern and those types of folks. And they talk about it in a way that's very relatable. And they seemed super knowledgeable. Like, we're archaeologists, so we're coming in with the hard questions, the very nuanced questions. And never once did I trip up one of the interpreters. They always had an answer and it made sense. They
were good answers.
Yeah. And it was in a way that was easily understood, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
And there was nuance to it.
I understand that there are people out in there that will do first person interpretation.
Yeah.
But typically, if you start to engage them in a way that the character doesn't make sense, they'll drop that. So basically, they're leaving it up to the audience. Do you want to engage with this character or do you want to just ask questions as, And I think that's a good middle ground because first person interpretation can be very risky and can make people very uncomfortable.
Yeah, especially, a site like Williamsburg, you're probably getting tourists from not just the United States, but other places as well who are just interested in learning about American history. And if you're coming from a place, especially where, say, English isn't your first language, and all of a sudden this person is talking to you in first person narrative, I could see how that could be overwhelming and slightly confusing.
I would say even if it is your first language, I've done a fair amount of reading on this stuff, and there was a lot of discussion in one source in particular was talking about how risky first person is, because even if it is your first language, it can be very uncomfortable for people to try to engage that way.
And I feel like some first person interpreters, first of all, it makes it very difficult to ask questions from a modern perspective, like, what are you wearing? And they say, well, this is what everybody wears. It's like, well, no, I want to know the history of it or the purpose of it, things that in a first person narrative make it hard to explain without making the person asking the question either confused or even feel kind of dumb, honestly.
Well, and yeah, so the risk is that if it fails, it fails really bad.
Yeah.
Whereas third person is much safer. Where first person succeeds, it can be fairly rewarding for that purpose too, but it's a pretty risky move. And so I thought their middle ground of like offering first person and then just dropping it as soon as the person, wanted to engage in a different way. That's probably a good way of handling that.
Yeah. And I another thing I really appreciate is the amount of archaeology that is on display, that is actively happening. And when I was a kid, I don't know if it was just not there or I don't remember it, but I have a feeling it wasn't as prominently put on display. Like when we went to the art museum, I expected art, even though they say like showcasing history through an artist's lens or something like that is their motto. I was like, okay, it's going to be all like just paintings, but it was everything from folk art, like, even toys. I really enjoyed the historic toys exhibit and the folk art exhibit, but they had a really great exhibit on ceramics and on historical clothing. And while I was there was actually a historical clothing conference going on. So that was a lot of fun. We were sitting in the cafeteria eating lunch and there's all these women around us in period dress. I was like, this is great. Nerding out.
That museum was very cool.
Yeah. And I was excited because it had some ceramics from Dave the Potter that we did another episode on.
Yep. So that was the first Dave the Potter ceramics I got to see in person.
Yeah. And I was very excited. I was hoping they would have some, but you never know.
Just a little bit of a funny thing that happened there. I did trip someone up by accident, not meaning to. There's musical instruments in this little wing playing, and one of them was the kit violin, which is
Oh,
looks like a toy violin. And I was talking about how awful that must sound. And I think he was a security guard, so he wasn't like fully trained to be an interpreter. He kind of chimes in and says, well, actually, you look at the length of the stem and it's actually not too different, and it actually sounds pretty good. And I said, well, doesn't the body of the violin matter for the sound too? And he's like, I don't know, I just want to hear them say. So, yeah.
oh,
So
they
I didn't mean to like trip him up, but
when
yeah.
when I was there, one of the docents was there, and he actually had, I guess they do have musicians that come and will play those instruments for special concerts. They have a organ that's also a piano, and it has a very interesting history that he showed us a video of somebody playing it. I guess it's like the only one in the United States. And he was talking about the restoration of it and stuff. But then with the kit violin, he also had a video of somebody playing that. And it sounds like a violin. Because I was wondering about that too, because it's all about like the wooden box and yeah, but it sounded like a violin.
Yeah.
There was some really cool stuff in that museum.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. I love some of the weirdness that happened. There's like one I loved. It was a hippo made by someone who's never seen a hippo before because it had horns on its nose, and its mouth was open and its tongue was out. And then its back opened up and there was a record player inside. And so actually, apparently if you read the thing, what this would do is you play a record in there and it was mechanical and the tongue would actually move as though the hippo was singing. It was the strangest thing, and I love weird stuff like that. So
yeah, they had a lot of just the folk art. To me was the most interesting because it showcases well, first of all, it showcases a lot of the kind of influences from immigrants from all over the world, essentially. And it was also just the ingenuity of people in general was fascinating, the things they came up with. And the toys were really fun. There was one, it was like a court jester that would go down a flight of stairs, like doing little backflips, kind of. And they said, I was like, how did they do that? And I thought it was with a magnet, but it was with a little vial of mercury that was in it, and it would like tip and cause like gravity to cause them to do little flips. And I was like, oh my gosh, a child's toy with mercury in it.
Lovely. Did you make it over to the Native American encampment when you were there?
I did not know.
Did you hear about it?
I heard about it, yeah.
It was pretty cool. So they had a brick making display, and across the road from that was the Native American encampment. And this was done by people who were descended from tribes, various tribal groups. And they were fantastic. We basically walked up like, what is going on here? And they said, come on in, have a seat. We don't have a plan. We just invite people to come and sit and ask questions and have conversations. And they were engaging, and they seemed to enjoy talking to us. At least they were put on a good act if they weren't feeling it. So that was pretty special. And we also stumbled across the renovation, I don't know if the renovation is the right word, the project where they were doing archaeology and had kind of done a memorial to an African-American cemetery.
Oh yeah, I think they were renovating the church that was associated with
the church is gone. The church used to be there, and then with things building, the cemetery got built over. So they've gone back, they've done archaeology of it, and I think the descendants wanted DNA, so they did some DNA. And now they have kind of coffin-shaped slabs marking each burial in that space.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I did see
and
that.
then across a little space from that is actually a schoolhouse.
That's what I was thinking of, the schoolhouse.
So the schoolhouses. And so the schoolhouse wasn't open yet, but they were set up to talk to us about it a little bit. And again, they did a fantastic job, dealt with it very well. And I really liked that. I would love to see what they're going to do with that in the future too.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Did you go to the graveyard by the church?
I got to look over the fence for it. I didn't get to go in. It was closed by the time I saw that.
The iconography, the symbolism was amazing.
Were there any winged death heads?
Of course.
Oh, I missed them. That's my favorite.
Skull and crossbones, winged death heads, like all that cool stuff. There was one woman who died and her 3 children were buried with her, and they shared a stone and a footstone. And it was like every Victorian cemetery symbol that you could could think of was slapped on one stone. And I was like, this is so cool. Myself and one of our former FPAN colleagues who now works for North Carolina, and she works in the cemetery program there. She and I were just snapping all the pictures of every icon we could find. It was really fascinating.
And so this ties into Small Things Forgotten,
Yes.
a book we did a while ago, where headstones were a big part of that, and how the headstone iconography shifted and was transported to more rural areas and stuff. So that's, if you want a kind of refresher on that, that's what that's kind of covers a lot of that anyway.
Yeah. No, it was a fascinating cemetery. And it was interesting too, not only just looking at the headstones, but some of the preservation choices that were made, because some of the graves were right up against the building under the drip line of the church's roof. And so the marble was eroding from the drip line, and they had put gutters in at some point. So that's no longer an issue, but you could tell they maybe did the preservation work on the stone before we knew what we know now, is because there was some like concrete and other things that we wouldn't use in this day and age. So it was just interesting to kind of see the evolution of things like that as well, and some of the preservation choices that were made.
Yeah. And so for me, I saw, lots of little things. We went to a pub a little bit, at some restaurants. The other big thing, though, was we went to a pirate trial, which, again, going back to our second book, Captain Kidd's Lost Ship, was kind of interesting to me. So they held it in the evening in the courtyard, and the audience was sort of participating. It was interesting. So all the people were doing first person. So actually, the bailiff, he comes out first, puts down, he has a big stick he pounds for order. He puts that down and turns and talks to us in third person as himself and explains what's going to happen. And he picks it up, and then boom, everything from there is enacting it. And so they had the accused pirate, who they just straight up would bring out the pirate, and they had some nice little touches. I think historically it was pretty fantastic. They had one bit where the prosecutor said, "I have here 26 accounts from people who claim that he is a pirate. Would you like me to read them?" And the judge says, "Good Lord, we'll be here all night." And so they didn't read us all 26 of them. But they brought out several witnesses, accused him. And then after the whole little questioning of the witnesses and stuff, the audience had opportunity to submit a few questions to ask about the situation. In the end, the audience all voted on guilt or innocence. And we were a little uncertain how it was going to be handled. Is this going to be campy, goofy? Because it's potentially a serious thing, because yes, pirates were pretty awful in a lot of the things they did, but also a lot of them, as we read about in Captain Kidd's Lost Ship, were people who simply didn't really have another choice.
Yeah.
Like they were marginalized for one reason or another by the economy or by the government. And so that's also kind of a sensitive subject. But they handled it very, very well. It felt very realistic in the way they presented it. And I couldn't believe how quick they were at responding to audience questions.
Oh, good.
Because that's ad-libbing. I know they do it a lot. They probably get a lot of the same ones, but they still have to ad-lib on the spot. And I did appreciate one moment where the judge got a question. He was clearly thinking. He's started taking some notes or something. I'm like, "Oh, you're just buying time." But they all were really, really impressive bunch of people. I really enjoyed that.
I visited both the courthouse and then also the Capitol building. And the Capitol building was where capital trials were held. And we were there with a school group, actually. We were on the tour with a school group. And at first I was like, oh boy, here we go, a bunch of kids. But the kids were great. They asked wonderful questions. And the woman giving the tour talked about one historical figure who lived at Williamsburg. Her name was Suzanne Cooper, I believe. And her husband had been gone for something like a decade or so. And she had, having to survive and feed her kids, she opened a tavern and she was making all this money. And at the time, women could not really own property, right? So she was trying to make a case in court that should her husband come back, she didn't want him to get all her stuff and then him to peace out again, essentially. And the woman who was our tour guide was talking about the court cases and the various like branches of government that had to try the case, and then it had to go to the King of England. And she was talking about all the royal symbolism that you see in each room. Like the governor was in charge of Williamsburg, but we know who's really in charge. And she did a great job. And the case got all the way to the king. And then she's like, at every step, she asked the children, like, do you think it got this far? And they were like, no, probably not, because she was a woman. And then she was like, well, actually it did. And it went this far and it went this far. And they were all like, what? And when it got to the king, she asked, and this one boy goes, I would like to think that he said that she could keep her money, but my guess is that he said no. And she was like, you're right. But it was just really fascinating to see the interaction between the children and the interpreters and how intelligent these kids were, how inquisitive they were, the questions they were asking. And when we were we went to the courthouse where, more local cases were tried. And it was also kind of like your government center. So even when they weren't trying court, there were other things going on. It was the post office. It was this, it was that, that's where everybody went. And one of the women there, she was an adult. She asked a question about how enslaved people were tried because they were seen as essentially real estate. And she did such a superb job of She called it like 18th century logic or something like that, or colonial logic or something. I forget. But she did such a superb job of breaking down that legal system and how to us it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but why they did it the way they did it. And because I was like, oh, this is a complicated question this woman is asking. But she broke it down and it was so easy to understand. And I'm not going to try and go into the detail because I won't do it justice. But I was impressed with the way she handled that and the answer she gave and the context too.
Sure.
Was very cool. So,
okay.
Yeah, great job overall. Enjoyed it.
All right. So once again, apologies for not having the full episode as planned. It just wasn't in the cards this time. Hope you enjoyed this conversation, though. If you have visited Williamsburg, however, leave us a comment and tell us your experience.
Yeah.
Tell us your favorite thing you see, whatever it is. We'd like to hear from you all and hear what you think, too, on this. But next time, we mean it, plan to come back and finish up the Lost City of the Monkey God and do that last section that we were planning on doing. So I look forward to that, and we'll see you all next time.
All right. Happy reading, everybody.
Archaeology Books for Fun is brought to you by the Florida Public Archaeology Network, a program of the University of West Florida. You can find out more about archaeology and about FPAN at fpan.us. We appreciate any feedback, so if you're listening to us as a podcast, please leave us a review, and if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Thanks for listening.